Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new session of Glamorous Toolkit Live. Today, we're going to talk about Lepiter. Lepiter is the latest major evolution in Glamorous Toolkit, and we are very excited to show it to you today. So let's go straight into it. I'm going to now share the screen. This is what we have today in Glamorous Toolkit. So it looks familiar to previous versions, but what's different here are a couple of things. First of all, here we have a playground and a note, and you can see that they have these similarly looking icons, and then there's this new entry here, which is called Lepiter. We'll get back to it soon. So let's start with this new thing, which is called a note. So what's that? So if we click on this, we get a note. So that's actually, we are now in a Lepiter page. So in its simplest form, Lepiter is a note taker. Well, it's a note taker using markdown. So here I could have a new snippet, and let's even say I'm going to nest it here. So markdown can include variations like like something like this. So this is going to be an italic, and notice how as I type, the markup appears and disappears and immediately takes effect. You can do the same thing with bold, and so now we have bold. But interestingly, we also have other things such as links. It can also include links. So like this one. So here's one. I'm typing these two square brackets that by now are rather commonplace in different places. And so I'm now also have another page around here, which is called Glamorous Toolkit. And so I just created a link. Notice how as I created a link actually appears there, so it's being rendered. And if I move away with the cursor from there, we only get the name of the link. And as the cursor goes into the space, then the markup appears again. And the other interesting thing about this link is that it's expandable. So I can have here a preview of it if I want. So I have just embedded that page, another Lepiter page right in here. Or if I want to, I can click on it. And then I can see it there, just like how we are used to in a typical Glamorous Toolkit workflow. So that's in the simplest form. That's what Lepiter is. Now, the other thing that we have seen here is okay, there's a playground here. So what is this playground? So if I click on that, I basically get the same kind of thing, except that here it doesn't say note, it's a playground. And I get a snippet, which is a programmable snippet here. So I can go and program, I can write Faro code. So for example, I can say 40 plus 2, and if I execute that, I get 42, so I get the inspector on the right. And I can go ahead and create other snippets over here. So if I say collection subclasses, I'm going to get that. So now I have two different snippets. And interestingly, I can also say, well, I want some other type of snippet. So this is a more complicated example. And so now here I said, okay, let's make this one a subset of a subnode of this one. So now I'm actually having here snippets intertwined with text in arbitrary places. So that's a very brief idea of what Lepiter is. It's a note taker, it's a notebook, but also can be combined interestingly with inspectors. So let's see what kind of things we can do with it. Now, if you go back on the main page, on the main tab, we can see here there's a new tile here with a Glamorous Toolkit book. If we go in there, we notice that we get a whole lot of things here. So on the one hand, we have here what looks like a table of contents of a book, and which means that I can have here multiple of these pages, and each of these pages is going to be a Lepiter page. And here I have pretty much like a knowledge base like that, but with a table of contents. And when I look at one of those, I can see that there's a page which is made out of these snippets, and the snippets are all editable. But in the simplest form, it just looks like a readable document. So here we have some snippets, we have some links, some external links, some internal links. But we also have this kind of graphical representation here, which looks to be live. So we can get back to that. So here we have, as I said, we have multiple pages, which means we are now talking about the idea of having a knowledge base, and these pages can be linked among each other. As we are seeing here about Glamorous Toolkit has a link to moldable development. So it's kind of like what we would expect from a knowledge management system. And let's actually see how do we go about playing with this. So now this being a system that likes to introspect in itself on itself, we can have here we see here that there are a couple of these kinds of use cases. We also have start to have a number of these how-tos. And so one of these how-tos is called how to visualize the current database. So what does this mean? Okay, this looks like a page, and we have text over here with some links. We have some file snippets over here, and so let's take a look at what this is. So if I look at this script over here, it says, well, this snippet, which means this is going to be a special variable that points to specifically this snippet over here that in which we're writing. Then we get the database, and from that database, we get all the pages. So if I'm now inspecting that, what do I get? I get all the 94 pages that currently make up the Glamorous Toolkit book. So all of these are pages that make up that book. So now, well, we also, of course, we notice here that we have these kinds of links here. So why don't we visualize those dependencies there? So let's do just that. So this script over here does exactly this. It takes all of those pages and creates a graph out of this. Now we notice here how this little thing here, this page here, is actually connected to everything. And that the reason why it's connected to everything is that it's simply the table of contents that is going to link to everything else. So maybe that's not so interesting to have them around. So let's actually remove this. So now we're going to say the pages that we are interested in are all the pages on the database from which we reject the one that is called like this. And if we visualize again, we get a more interesting graph. Okay, so that kind of looks more understandable. We can see pages that are isolated. We can see pages that are a little bit more connected with others. Now, this is what we typically would have from a graph of a knowledge base. But in the spirit of moldable development, we know that context is the most important. And so moldable developments was started from this idea that software systems are highly contextual, and because they're highly contextual, we can't actually predict the specific tools that people will want. Because we can't predict the questions that people will have. We can predict classes of questions, but not specific questions. As a consequence, we should give them the platform with which they should be building the tools to answer their own questions as those questions arise. And the same thing should happen here, because now we can look at software as being a representation of knowledge. It's executable knowledge. So similar things would happen with our notes, like our thoughts that we capture as notes, and then now we are having a graph of those kinds of thoughts. And so this view over here. So what are the ideas of moldable development? Is that you can almost turn the problem upside down. In other words, it's saying, well, if a tool is applicable exactly as is to any other system or any other data set, it might be that it's not particularly valuable. It's interesting, but for example, this one is entertaining. We can understand some some parts of it, we understand whether or not there are connections, but it still doesn't tell us anything because there's no contextual thing. We can actually take this snippet and apply it to any other database, and we will get a visualization. But what if we start to contextualize that? So for example, here, let's actually see which of these nodes include the word Lepiter in title. So if we do exactly the same thing, but now we're saying that, now we can see, okay, look at that. This one is highly quite well connected, and it's using it's connected. It's not quite in the middle of the visualization, but it's quite there, and it's about Lepiter. So now we can start distinguishing between this and the other ones, and this becomes more interesting. But in any case, this is one of those examples where we are taking the same principles that apply to what was considered development, and now we're just applying exactly one-to-one towards knowledge management. We're gonna get back to that a little later. So let's go back to our book. So if I now zoom into this page over here, I'm seeing the table of contents. You see, now it's the same pattern like we are having with the rest of the interfaces. That is, you can navigate to some point, and then when you zoom into that point, you get an orientation of the overall data in which you're in, right? So we went to a page, and when I look at the page in isolation like this, is one way. So I can just look at that. Maybe I can navigate to some other page over here, for example, and I can look at it like that. But when I zoom into it, I will see it, for example, I will see it in the context of the table of contents. So now I'm going to go and navigate, and that's like an orthogonal way of navigating. So another thing we notice here that we have text, markdown, we have links, and we now have Faro snippets. But today, Lepiter ships with other kinds of, is not just specific to Faro. So here we have a page that actually gets an application or an actual application. So let's say we want to visualize a yarn log file. So that's where JavaScript projects define dependencies. So we're going to use here a Faro snippet to go to this URL here, which is on GitHub, and we're going to get a yarn file. So if we're looking at the string over here, we can see, okay, that's the yarn file. So it would be interesting. One of the applications, like when we're looking at Glamorous Toolkit, is that, well, we can go and analyze data that comes from different kinds of sources. But sometimes, and in many cases, we're actually just simply implementing the parsers ourselves. But in this case, we don't have a yarn parser. But of course, there is a yarn parser already available in JavaScript. So let's go and do that. We now have here a JavaScript application that they started. And here we have a JavaScript code. And in this code, we're going to say, here we have a variable called log file content that we have gotten from Faro. And then we pass that one into a log file that is going to be parsed like that. And that's another module that we had to install in our server. So this is actually talking with a local Node.js server that actually runs here at 6912. And at the end, we simply want to return a log file JSON string variable that simply takes that yarn internal representation and then stringifies as JSON. So what do we do with that? Well, after we have a JSON, we can simply take it back into Faro. And now we're going to say, okay, let's parse that one. So now we parse the JSON file, and we got these kinds of dictionary of projects over here. And so now we can, if we go and massage this data a little bit, so here we're executing, we're preparing a bit of data. We're doing a little more over here to add edges. And once we have the data available, we can simply go and visualize that graph. And that's exactly what we do here. So we're now visualizing Mondrian, and we get here the visualization of the dependencies. And so again, the interesting thing about this is that we got a page that is a combination between of code written in two languages here that even exchange variables seamlessly, and we get a result out of it. Now this we played a bit more with with the idea of debugging here. So here we just executed JavaScript code. But if we take a look at another explanation here, it's called JavaScript debugger setup and example. We get to see here that we can turn the application, the server side, we can make it be in debugging mode, which means that when we're gonna execute now a piece of code, we're gonna get another, we're gonna get now a debugger. Now to see that debugger, it opens in another window. So I'm gonna share now the full desktop here. And so that's exactly what you see here. You see a debugger over in JavaScript. So that's JavaScript code over here. And we see the debugger that we have just placed in our source code over here. I set the debugger there. So let's continue this. And if we continue this, we actually get the result right here. So let's take another look, a look at another more complicated, slightly more complicated kind of an example. Here we are also having a debugger statement. So we can see that, okay, it encounters that debugger statement. But when we are playing, when we are resuming the execution, it finds another debugger statement somewhere else, because we have now, this is just a, it's just a little piece of code that computes a factorial, nothing complicated, but there is this debugger statement in there, so kind of a breakpoint, and we notice that this debugger actually stopped it. Now, the interesting thing is, how is this debugger implemented? And it's interesting because this is nothing but a normal Glamorous Toolkit debugger. So if we click here on in the top, we can see, and in fact, there are two debuggers here. One is on the far side, which simply says, well, I know that I started here, so I started in Faro, but now I'm waiting for value. But I noticed that because of what's in here on this stack, there's this language link promise, for example, I can provide you a debugger adapter program. And so when I flip to that one, I now get to see what's happening on the other stack. And this is all happening in the same moldable environment, right? So we can hook in a foreign runtime right into the same tools without actually having to modify or having to produce another set of tools. I don't know what that is. Okay, good. So let's continue here. So we saw now we have text, we have links, we can form a knowledge base, we have snippets written in multiple languages, we have debuggers for those languages. But it's also interesting to notice that these snippets, which are the units of composition here, essentially come with their own language. So here, this is a markdown language, and this is a Faro language, and this is a JavaScript language over here. And but these languages can be of they can have other representations. So let's actually go and see here. There's another entry in the book which is called Mapping Moldable Development. This here is a wordly map. This is a snippet, just like any other snippet, except that this snippet here is a wordly map that can actually be edited in place. So I can go here, I can edit it in different ways. I can delete it if I want to. And we can customize this the way we want. And it's interesting here that this is a snippet that comes with a language that is no longer textual. I'm going to get back to that a little later. Okay, so what else can we have here? We can also have other kinds of snippets that are not necessarily languages with which we construct something, but things that simply visualize some artifacts that are external to the page. So here we have a page in the book which is called Example-Driven Development by Example. This is essentially a little tutorial that wants to teach or explain how examples work in Glamorous Toolkit. So examples are these interesting ways of representing tests, not quite all. They look like a test except that they return an object. And this here is a tutorial showing how one can go about playing with them. And so the first step over here, if we look at it, it says, well, imagine that you're writing this code. So here you're creating a class, which is called GT Examples Tutorial. And then you have here a method, just called create file in memory. And this is going to be the body of that method. So we're basically annotating with GT examples. We're going to see stuff with it. Now, what's interesting about this is that this is not just a piece of code that we have inserted here. This is an actual change or changes snippet. And now we notice here that here we have a little tool which says, well, simply apply those changes. So you can go and create this class yourself. But if you just want to go quickly through this tutorial, you can simply press this button. And as you press this button, right, the code has been now adapted or integrated into the environment. And so the relevant parts have been updated. So here, for example, we have another snippet, which is an example snippet that pointed to something that didn't exist. It pointed to this method over here. And now that the method appeared, boom, it shows it in the preview over here in the document. So the interesting thing there is that okay, now we have a link to a piece of code, and notice because this is an example, it's a runnable piece of code. It means it gives us this little tool over here with which we can execute this example, and get an object shown in an inspector with all the different parts of with a functional inspector over here. Okay, now there are other kinds of there are also other types of kind of. So here we have an example that pointed to something that already exists in the system, even though it is not literally in this page. It links to this, and the code simply appears and it gets embedded here. But other kinds of things are more, they can be about artifacts that are somewhere else. So here, for example, we have a Jenkins. I have a Jenkins page, and this is a private page. This is my own note about the actual Jenkins server that we use at Think. And what happened? Something happened? Oh. No, it didn't happen. So what we are seeing here is this is a single page, and it's now in this other database, which is my own database. We're going to get into that. And we see here that we still have some issues this is the actual Jenkins server right now. We have a couple of issues. We have some issues with the build since a couple of days. We're working hard to fix it. And so if I now look at this and say, why is this a problem, right? Then we go into the typical views of the Jenkins file. But the interesting thing is that here we have basically a page that just embeds that whole thing in it, and then we can see what exactly is failing, and we can go and investigate that part. Now, the interesting thing here is that this here is actually working with the API, so with the REST API of the of Jenkins. In fact, it works with, I think it's 3 different APIs, and this we put together the views that are interesting for us. Those are basically accessible from inside Lepiter, right? So the entry point is a Lepiter page, and from there we're going into all of the we're going into the we're starting the exploration from there. It seems to be so. Let's take some questions now, maybe if there are from the audience, and we can continue afterwards. Are there any questions? Anybody?
Yeah, I just had a quick question because you already answered the changes one, so I was quite happy with this. But you say that between the snippets, even if you use different languages, the variables are still being passed on from one snippet to the other. What kind of mechanism is in place for that?
What do you mean? What kind of mechanisms?
Because like in JavaScript and in Pharo, the types of variables are not exactly the same. If they are integers, if they match, it's no problem, I suppose. But if they have some differences in implementation or something.
Oh yeah, sure. We're actually working with proxy objects. So when we're working with something that is remote, you get a proxy object. You can actually work with it and send messages to it. And when you get it on the Pharo side, you're going to work with the proxy object. Or if the object can be resolved internally, we work directly with that one, right? So if it's an integer, then we just got that integer and move it over. Or if it's with a string, we could resolve that. But if we would have not been able to resolve the object, we would have simply continued working with the proxy object, even if you would have send messages to it from Pharo, but it would have been those messages would have been executed on the remote environment.
Okay, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, are there other questions?
Ralph is asking a question textually about which node version are you using?
Oh, I'm not sure yet at the moment. I forgot which node specific node version. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question about because
yeah, I think it's 1416 or something like this. Say again.
Yeah, sorry. I just had a question about the GitHub issue snippet type because I've seen that there's many other snippet types.
Yeah.
Just more of a general question about how it's working. Just calling to the API to fetch the issues and that's it, or
also we are
sorry, maybe not the most clear question.
We are showing so Glamorous Toolkit comes with a number of predefined snippets, and the first order for us is to see it working, to show how these snippets work. We think that people will want to create many of these snippets, and those snippets will be custom made for different kinds of workflows, for different kinds of external sources, and people will simply implement what they want. In our case, with the GitHub issue, it's simply something that just takes there and shows us the status of that issue and the title. So, but again, it's most of these snippets we have created simply to sample the kinds of things that we can possibly do. Okay, let's go quickly a little bit further. So one of the one of the one of the parts that I mentioned here is that we are having that we have um, links across the knowledge base, like you kind of expect today from a wiki system. So for example, here we are seeing something like an explicit link. And we can see the places where this specific page, the About Glamorous Toolkit page, is being referred to. So it's being referred to from the table of contents from here, which is also being referred from the a think page. So if I now click on this think page, it actually gets me to the page that is referring to About Glamorous Toolkit. So this is with links, but I mentioned that we can have snippets that are not necessarily of that are not of a just textual, that they can have a visual representation. And one of those was this wordly map we see over here. Now, some of these nodes, or any of these nodes, we can edit those nodes. And so, for example, if I right click on this one over here, I can see that there is a link here to another page. And if I go to that page, so software assessment, for example, that's the page, I can see that it has some references. There are some references to the software assessment, and these references, they come from this link over here, but they also come from this one over here. And again, like what's interesting is that these are live, right? So and the other part that is interesting is that the links can come from any part, anywhere in the target language and link to some other place, which is could be a page, but later on we'll see, we'll show how we can actually use similar mechanisms to link to arbitrary objects. So that's about these links, and we're quite excited about the fact that we're not linked to a specific language. We're not even tied to a textual languages. We can actually, the model is flexible enough to handle visual languages as well. Now, one more thing that I want that I showed you before was this was how to visualize the current database here. So let's go back to that one, because there's one interesting point here that is worth paying attention to. So again, like I'm gonna execute these pages. I'm gonna take all the pages that do not have Glamorous Toolkit booked, and I'm gonna visualize those now. And we get this inspector, and in this inspector, we get the visualization. Now, the interesting part here is that if we click on this visualization, we actually spawn the page, because behind this is obviously the same. Behind this visualization, we have the same object, which represents a page. And if I look at it, I actually go to the to that page. And this is interesting because what we've just done here was to take a typical, like just take a default experience, and then we have created a little prototype here or a little visualization, and that guided our navigation, and then we can continue editing as if it's just a normal flow, right? So it's this idea of visualizing or offering visualizations for the knowledge base. It's not a specific feature. It's just something that is built into the environment and simply can be used exactly as you're using it for external data, like we're using it for APIs, like we're using it for software. We use the same principles to now also extend towards knowledge management. And that simply shows that these spaces are actually not different, right? They are treated differently today, but they are in essence not at all different. Now, but we can go a little step further here. So here we can see there's a page here with snippets and has structure. You can play with those. And this is like the editor that we have seen until now. But behind the scenes, there's an object. And this object is called a page here. It's an instance of a page, it's a class. And it has, we can look at it and it has structure. And we can see all sorts of information about that, and we can go and navigate it, just like we navigate any other object in the system. And so behind these tools, we always can go back to the object level. And even if we want to go and extend that class, we can do it. We can program it right in place, or we can just open an object playground. So if I now go here and I open an object playground over here, I notice that this isn't on the Lepiter page. And so let's say that I'm interested to find out where is this located. There was a question recently about this. So if I'm now inspecting this, I'm inspecting now a little snippet here, which says, give me the database of this page and show me the monitor. And I can see, okay, here's the monitor. And if I now ask the monitor for the local root, I'm going to go here, the file reference with the exact path to that location, right? So this idea of like whenever we need to go and debug, and the way we work with, sometimes we just need to have the technical details, or we need to get the technical details for various reasons. It's possible. We don't have to, but if we do need to, they are right there. Okay, now another thing that we saw, so up to now we saw pages that are organized in knowledge bases, but in fact we can have multiple of those. So by default, when you open Lepiter, you get your default database or knowledge base, and you get the Glamorous Toolkit book. So all the notes that you create, right, like this one, or like this one, they go into your default knowledge space, which is located typically in your documents folder, and that database is going to load every time you open a new image. So you can now very quickly share notes, thoughts, or snippets, or playgrounds across. You can easily share those across different installations, different runtimes. And all of these changes to a page are synchronized transparently. Right now, we're doing it every 30 seconds, but there is a transparent synchronization mechanism, or that basically stores everything locally. Now, those files can either go to Git, or they can be shared in different ways, and we'll announce some other things later related to that point. Now, a final point that I wanted to make here is that here we have these kinds of even this one, we have a markdown, right? So we notice we have a page is made out of snippets. Every snippet basically comes with its own language. So we can have many of those. One of the questions here was about the GitHub issues, but here basically you can say, I want a new snippet, and here I can choose the different kinds of snippets. So let's say I'm going to start here with a fire snippet, and here we let's take a look at this at the kinds of other links that we can have. So here, if I open a curly brace, I can see that there are few constructs here that they're like extensions to the base markdown language. And let's say if I'm going to pick a class over here, and I'm going to say object, notice how I get completion there as well. And so now I have here, this is a link to a class. So we can have a link to this class. So let's take this string over here, right? Let's put this one into a note, or let's say string, and I'm going to paste the same thing. And um, and then I'm going to parse this thing. So I'm going to take the parser that we use to parse the um, the to basically produce a syntax highlighting here. So the markdown parser that we're using, or the Lepiter parser that we're using, and I'm going to parse that string. And if I inspect that, what I see here is I get this is a link to a class. So if I click on this, I see, okay, this is a text node. This is also a text node, the column over there. This is also a text node over there. But this is a different node. This is called a document or annotation in this case. So it's an annotation node, and in there is a class. The interesting thing is that this parser, the parser that parses this part, is distinct from the parser that parses the other part. Although, even if they are distinct, we can still see them in the same tree. So, which basically means that it is possible to extend the even the language, the basic markdown language is extensible out of the box, so by design. And that means that you can use all the services that you can have. So completion, syntax highlighting, you can use those in a basically in a uniform fashion, right? And more interesting is exactly is this one. So here we are having completion inside completion. So there's a language here, there's another language embedded there, and yet we use the same completion service in there. So that kind of that geeky detail over there, we have to put it in just because we kind of like it. And so if people want to extend the parser with new kinds of embedded links, so for example, people recently asked for it to do. This is the way it can be added, and the mechanism is already in place. So that's why we are saying Lepiter and Glamorous Toolkit in general is they are an environment, they are a platform with which people can combine in many different ways these operators that are being available in order to adapt to the different contexts in which this whole thing is being used. So we're pretty excited about this, and the main reason why is besides the fact that it's simply shown that the space of notebooks, the space of development environments, and the space of knowledge management systems are not that different. In fact, they're one and the same in our environment. It is interesting what happens when you start to use this. We notice we're using it now since a few months, and we notice how there is this emergent behavior that was different than was before. And so for one, we simply create more documentation, which is great. It feels great for us. I hope that it feels great for people that are consuming the documentation. But the other thing is really this idea of how do we create documentation. So let's say that that I like this kind of note over here. Maybe I'm going to go here and say, oh, actually, by the way, this is how the parser works internally, right? And I like this one, and I'm going to unindent this, and I'm going to indent that, and I like this one now. And it's at this moment that maybe I'm going to promote this whole node, which was anonymous or was unnamed until now. And I'm going to promote this one and says, what is Lepiter made of, for example. And I just now created a whole new page. It's a named page, which means that if I'm now going to search for it, what is Lepiter made of, right? I'm going to see it right there, right? And I can just open it anytime afterwards, and I'm going to see it I'm going to go to my node. But again, the interesting part here is how this node, we created it we just played, and at some point says, oh, I really like this one, so maybe we give it a name if we want to find it this way. We don't necessarily have to give it a name because it's already linked in, right? So here, for example, if we go to this page, well, Glamorous Toolkit, we're going to see that there are these other parts, right? So somewhere here, we're going to have the link to what is Lepiter made of. So we can see it there. And similarly, maybe we are one of those that we have this flow of using maybe something like Zettelkasten or daily. And so here we have all of those pages that we have created, and they are here by day, which means that here I have an outlook of the kinds of nodes that I created on that day. So that's a brief overview of Lepiter, but in summary is we find that this unification of these different spaces is exciting exactly because we don't have to, we find that we don't have to pick the entry point to work anymore. We're simply going to start in the Lepiter page, and then we're going to go from there, and we'll see. Sometimes this enhances the existing knowledge base. In the worst case, it's just a scrap notebook and something that we're going to throw away. But we no longer have to think about that. And that's a huge win, or we didn't have to think about it up front. And that's a huge win. Thank you for the attention. And are there any questions now? So somebody over here says the SMAC integration in Glamorous Toolkit pays for itself another time over. SMAC is to those that maybe are not less familiar, SMAC is the parsing framework. And indeed, we do agree that having a language workbench underneath makes a whole lot of integrations and combinations of tools interestingly possible. So there's a question here which says, does it mean that the parser can differentiate among and parse multiple languages in the same snippet? Yes, it is possible for now. And in this case, like for the case, for example, for the markdown parser, we're mostly focused on just providing these curly brace extensions. It's easy enough for people to remember. So then the completion then tells you what are the different artifacts that are available there. And that's basically what we are showing, but you're going to define each of these extensions in a separate parser, and the environment is able to put those things together. So yeah, there's one thing here is that are these parsers, for example, composable? They are not composable in the form of parser combinators, but they are the trick that we're using here is actually, if we go into those kinds of details, the trick that we're using here is that we are able to, it's just the visitor over the tree is able to basically jump from one to another and present the tree as if it's, it comes from a single parser. But at the end of the day, that's what a tool looks for. It just looks for a single tree. It doesn't matter how that tree was actually produced. So that's how we're solving that problem. Okay, are there other questions?
Maybe a question more for the Discord, but about the Git module of Toolkit. The question was more about is there plans to make it a bit more fleshed out, or if so, when, or if it's more of a second thought?
You refer to the Git interface, to the interface of Git from Glamorous Toolkit. That is still a work in progress. That's why Glamorous Toolkit is still a beta at the moment. But yes, we do have an interest in finishing that one too. Other questions? Are there any plans for long text snippets performance tweaks? Yes, there are plans. So right now, we have, it just works well with with snippets of small sizes. There's no conceptual limitation there. It's just that that was the implementation that we have right now, but that is something that we'll definitely revisit in the near future. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, what about multiple DBs? Yeah, as I showed, we already have multiple databases. So by default, when you're opening Glamorous Toolkit and you click on Lepiter over here, you will see, okay, these are the recent pages. So this is like a summary of all your databases. And this is a database that actually resides in your documents. This is a database that ships with Glamorous Toolkit, but you can add your own over here. And you can specify in which folder you want it to be, and then it's going to be there, and then you can create pages. Equally, I should also mention here is that we also have importers and exporters to different formats. So you can import Jupyter notebooks and Chrome databases, so entire Rome databases, Rome research, and we can also equally well export them. So in this case, we can export a Rome database like that. And if we click on if we go on a page, we will be able to also export a single page as a notebook, as a Jupyter notebook. This will be available rather soon. The logic already exists, it's just not published in the interface. So you already have the possibility of managing multiple databases. What would be the go-to resources for all new users of Lepiter NGT? More like this video, of course, like a specific section for the G-Toolkit book. So that's a good idea. We will add a link in the Glamorous Toolkit book to the video channel that we have on YouTube. So this session as well will be available on YouTube, and we'll add it to the book as well. That's a good point. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We look forward to all the feedback. It was great to see it received so well in our community. Please do engage with us on Discord, and for everybody watching, if you want to have a conversation with us, just join us on Discord. You can find all details about how to contact us at gtoolkit.com, and join that conversation to see how we can rethink the experience of building and relating to software systems. Thank you very much, and see you around.